Thank you very much. Welcome to the first Harvard Political Union debate of the year entitled Bush versus Clinton, Who is Fit to Govern? I'm Jeremy Horowitz. I'm the chair of the Harvard Political Union this semester, and I'll be moderating tonight's event. Let me introduce the debaters and panel of student media representatives first. Debating in favor of Bill Clinton, we have Gregory Chernak, who's president of Harvard Radcliffe for Clinton Gore, as well as Jay Kim, political director of the Harvard Radcliffe Democrats. And on the George Bush side are Emil Michael, president of the Harvard Republicans, and Stephen Coe, chair of Students for Bush. For the student media panel, we have Brian Ellison from the Harvard Crimson, Amy Finkelstein from the Harvard Independent, and Ben Heller from WHRB News. Before we begin, let me explain the philosophy behind tonight's debate. The debaters are not speaking in an official capacity for their respective candidates. They're speaking as undergraduates who have campaigned actively on campus for either Bush or Clinton. We have no representative for Ross Perot because, to the best of my knowledge, there is no active Students for Perot organization on campus. What we are doing tonight is not an exercise in role-playing. It is a forum for campus activists to express why they believe the person they have worked for is the better candidate for the presidency. We thought it would demean tonight's event to have a student representing Perot who is either not fully acquainted with the man's views or who is not an active supporter of his candidacy. Okay, let me go over the ground rules for the debate, and then we can begin. First of all, the media will ask a question to the Bush side, who will have 2 minutes to respond, and then the Clinton side will get a 1-minute rebuttal. The next question will go to the Clinton side for 2 minutes, and then the Bush side will get a 1-minute rebuttal. We'll do 12 questions in all, followed by a period of questions from the audience. And afterwards, each side will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. All right, why don't we begin? Brian Ellison from the Crimson gets the first question.
Thank you. Emil and Stephen, racial tensions have flared not only on the Harvard campus, but all over the country in a number of cases over the last 4 years. What do you believe has created this rise in tensions, and how would President Bush, if he were reelected, work to ease racial tensions and relations in the United States?
Yeah. Let's first talk about the difference in racial tensions now than there were 5, 10, 15 years ago. We've definitely moved toward a more progressive stand and a progressive achievement of racial tranquility in this country. Now, there are instances that pop up, and every year there are instances that happen. What we should do about that, and what George Bush has done about that and will do about that, come in the Civil Rights Act of 1990, which protects homosexuals and minorities from discrimination, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is another civil rights legislation, which has allowed for all handicapped people, those infected with HIV and AIDS, and kept those minorities from being discriminated against by employers and by new buildings being built, and it requires them to build handicap ramps and to ensure that equal treatment is given to all minorities and things like that. And that's what Bush will continue to do in his second term.
Thank you. The Clinton side, 1-minute rebuttal.
First of all, I'd like to say that Bill Clinton is very proud to have received almost monolithically the entire black vote as well as the vote of all of the other minorities, both in the state of Arkansas each time he's run for governor and in each of the primaries. I think that's because Bill Clinton, throughout his entire life and his entire career as governor, has shown a steadfast commitment to civil rights. Each time he's on the stump, it doesn't matter whether he's in South Central Los Angeles or whether he's in the suburbs of Orange County, California. He says the same thing. We are one nation. We want to be coming together instead of coming apart. Let's compare this with the Bush administration's reaction to the Los Angeles riots, which I think we all agree is the most violent flare-up of racial tension this year. First, they blamed, albeit indirectly, Murphy Brown, a fictional TV character. And then they blamed Lyndon Johnson, the president from 30 years ago. I think the president has a responsibility to bring this country together. That's what Bill Clinton will do, and that's what George Bush has not done for the last 4 years.
Thank you. Second question, Amy.
Governor Clinton has proposed major investments in infrastructure, yet he has promised repeatedly to only increase taxes for the top 1%. How can he pay for these programs?
Well, Governor Clinton has outlined a detailed proposal of his economic plan, which entails a number of spending increases on things such as infrastructure, which are critical to the future growth of our nation, at the same time illustrating a number of spending cuts as well as a few select tax increases. First of all, he has proposed increasing taxes on the wealthy, specifically those earning over $200,000 a year, from 31% to 36%. Now, the Republicans have been screaming you can't raise $150 billion from doing that. But if you look at the numbers Clinton's proposed, the $150 billion number is a 4-year number, and it is a total amount of increased tax revenue, both from this increase in tax from 31 to 36%, as well as a surtax on millionaires, and making foreign corporations pay the same tax rate as American corporations pay. If you combine all these different taxes, then you can get the $150 billion over a 4-year period. More importantly is Governor Clinton's commitment not to raise taxes on the middle class, the ones who've been paying more for the past 12 years while the taxes on the wealthy have decreased. And Governor Clinton has promised that if the revenue to pay for new programs, such as this new infrastructure, does not come from these increases in taxes and other cuts, he will either A, cut back on these new programs, or B, phase out other spending programs. So he easily can raise the revenue.
Thank you. Bush side, response?
Yeah, just a quick response to the previous question. If Governor Clinton is so committed to promoting civil rights, then why is Arkansas one of the only states in the country, 1 out of 2, in fact, that lacks a civil rights bill? Seeing, first of all, that Arkansas has a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor, and secondly, that he's been in office, not for 4 years, but 12 years. Now, onto the question of economics. The Clinton economic plan has proposed $220 billion in new spending and $154 billion in new taxes. That comes out to about $874 additional dollars for every person in America. Now, that's 3 times the spending proposed by both Mondale and Dukakis combined, and 2 times the amount of taxes. Taxes would swallow about 2/3 of all business profits, money which could be reinvested to create jobs, reinvest in new equipment, and to get this economy moving. Now, the Clinton plan says that they'll raise the top income tax rate. Now, this supposedly would only affect people who are making over $200,000. But even taking that into consideration, they propose to raise the top rate from 31% to 36%, a total of 5 percentage points. That's over $10,000 for a family making $200,000. Now, the top income tax rate increase would hit 63 to 77% of all small businesses and severely curtail job creation at that level. And also, realistically, a lot of economists have come forward and said that simply raising the taxes on people making over $200,000 by that amount will not cover the proposed spending of the Clinton plan. In fact, the $200,000 limit would have to be brought down to $64,000, perhaps even lower. And even a lot of journalists have come forward and said that in 1994 and 95, the Clinton administration would have to raise taxes on such things as gasoline, tobacco, alcohol, etc. And so Clinton's proposal to raise taxes on the rich and to provide middle-class tax relief is simply a political sham.
Thank you. Okay, third question, Ben.
This question for the Bush side. President Bush has pointed to the Gulf War as one of his greatest triumphs as president, not only because of its military execution, but because in some sense he considered it a just war. But on the other hand, in regard to Bosnia, President Bush has said that the nation should restrict itself to participation in the delivery of humanitarian aid. Perhaps it would help American voters to understand President Bush's idea of the place of military intervention in this country's foreign policy if you could tell us what his conception is of a just war.
In relation to the Gulf War was something that was to liberate a people, and I know the same thing applies to Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia. But the difference between the two is that we have to take American interests in hand first. The reason we went into Kuwait was because we knew we could go in there quickly, efficiently, obtain our objective, and leave with minimal casualties. We did not feel the same way about Bosnia and Croatia. We did not feel we could go in there and subject our troops to guerrilla warfare and the kind of things that were going on there. We were for sanctions, we were for the United Nations, and the United Nations did not sanction any intervention in Bosnia or Serbia. They did sanction the war in Kuwait, and we did obtain our objective. And we've done everything we can to promote democracy around the world in Grenada over the past 12 years, in Panama, in Angola, in Kuwait. That's what Bush is about, and he's for a strong military, and he will continue to be for a strong military in his second term.
Clinton side, 1 minute rebuttal.
First, let me say that Bill Clinton believes that the period of, from the invasion of Kuwait and Desert Storm and Desert Shield were George Bush's finest of his presidency. He unified the world around an aggressor and successfully liberated Kuwait. The criticism that Governor Clinton has is that the Bush foreign policy is completely reactive. He fails to take any advantage of the incredible changes going on in the world. He's not guided by any set of principles except to protect what he knows, react. We need a set of principles that we can lead this country through. Governor Clinton gave a speech in Milwaukee at the beginning of this month saying what he felt was the guiding principle of our foreign policy, and that should be democracy abroad. No more coddling of dictators like we did with Saddam Hussein before the Gulf War, as we can continue to do with the butchers of Beijing. We must change that. We must push for democracy. And in the case of Bosnia, let me just say that Governor Clinton pushed for stronger sanctions against the Bosnians, similar things that Senator Lugar, a Republican, had proposed, and Marlon Fitzwater attacked him as reckless. A week or two later, George Bush adopted the same policy. I think there's a problem there.
Thank you. Okay, next question goes to Brian for the Clinton side.
Greg and Jay, according to the count of one major daily student newspaper here at Harvard, Governor Clinton used the word change 28 times over the course of 3 debates. But many have said that Governor Clinton is no less a political insider than President Bush, and many, including Ross Perot, have said that neither major candidate, because he is a part of the political establishment, will really be a vehicle for serious change in government. What assurance is there that Governor Clinton will be able to effect the change of which he speaks so frequently?
Well, Governor Clinton is the only one of the major 3 candidates who, for the last dozen years or so, has not been a part of the Washington policy establishment. He has been on the receiving end of the Reagan era, an era which saw drastic cuts in the level of federal aid to states and other localities. What type of change does Governor Clinton want? And why is he best qualified to bring about that change? I think most of the people in America today are ready for a change. And not just any kind of change, but a change from the old policy of tax and spend from the Democratic side and the old policy of trickle-down economics from the Republican side. I think that the American people have had enough of both policies, and I think that an argument can be made that both policies have failed. What we offer is a third way, a new covenant, he has called it. A new covenant which says to people, government is going to provide you hope and it's going to provide you opportunity. But it's up to the people to take advantage of that opportunity, take responsibility for their own lives, and enrich their own lives in that way. An example is the National Service Trust Fund, which Governor Clinton has been talking about for well over a year now. It says to all students in high school, you can borrow all of the money that you need to attend college without regard to income, so long as you pay it back as a percentage of income over time, or with a couple of years of national service as teachers, policemen, healthcare workers, to benefit the community in which they grew up in. This is exactly the type of thing that we mean when we say a third way. We feel that George Bush cannot be the agent of change in this election. He is the epitome of the status quo. He has been a part of the Washington governing establishment for the last 2 decades. Mr. Perot is a candidate who is arguing for change as well. But Mr. Perot has no experience in effecting governmental change. Governor Clinton, on the other hand, has been making the types of changes that he talks about in this election for the past 12 years as the governor of Arkansas. And so we feel that Bill Clinton is the only real candidate who can possibly effect the change that the American people are so desperately wanting.
Thank you. Emil and Steve, 1 minute rebuttal.
Yeah. I would like you to recall that Bill Clinton says he wants to do for America what he's done for Arkansas. And he does want to do for America what he's done for Arkansas. CAFE standards of 40 miles a gallon enforced by the end of the century will cost auto workers 300,000 jobs. Bill Clinton's health care plan, by the statistics from the Office of Management and Budget, will cost America 700,000 jobs. Defense cuts $100 billion over 5 years will cost Americans 1.5 million jobs. That's the kind of change you want? Is the kind of change you want higher taxes? Is the kind of change you want lost jobs? Or is our economy about incentive, entrepreneurial spirit, encouraging business? You can't have employees without employers. That's one fundamental point the Democrats have been missing. They said they're not the tax and spend. What is this plan about? This plan is about taxing and spending. There's no departure from the Democratic policy goal. They just realized that that doesn't sell anymore. Let's realize what this change is about, and let's look at Arkansas's record: 50th in crime, 50th in teacher pay, 44th in tax fairness. That's what Bill Clinton wants to do for America. We don't want Bill Clinton.
Thank you.
Is that the full minute, or?
That was a rebuttal. Rebuttal.
Oh, it was a rebuttal.
Yeah, it's fine. Okay, Amy, you're up next.
This is for the Bush side. President Bush has made character a central issue in his campaign and repeatedly attacked Governor Clinton for his draft record. In light of this, how would you respond to the allegations of Bush's involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal and Iraq-gate?
Iraq-gate, and like Bush said the other night, it was 90-90. We meant 20/20 hindsight. You could decide what people you want to support, and we had no idea that Clinton was going to do that. Any records from Ambassador Glaspie, there's been no proof that there's been any coddling or we knew of the invasion before it happened. I mean, it was actually Bill Clinton who contacted Iraq's Washington ambassador to offer agricultural loans before the Iraq invasion. I mean, let's realize what we're dealing with here. We're not fortune tellers. We can't tell, a tyrant before he acts tyrannical. I mean, let's realize what things are about. Like, we're not talking about, Iran-Contra. There has been no proof of any scandals within the Bush administration. There have been proof of scandals within Bill Clinton's administration and throughout his life. Now, that's what makes character a fair issue in this campaign.
I'd like to take the second minute on that. All along, President Bush, has emphasized character as a defining quality of a man running for president of the United States. Certainly it is. I don't think President Bush's objection is so much with the fact that Mr. Clinton avoided the draft. It lies more or less with his explanations of that avoidance. Over the past months, you've seen throughout Mr. Clinton's campaign that there's been a consistent pattern of deception, a pattern of saying one thing in one place and then saying another thing in another place. If you look, there are plenty of examples. The most hackneyed one, I bet, is probably the quote that he gave after the majority vote in the Congress that authorized the president to use force in the Persian Gulf War. The quote runs as this: "I guess I would have voted with the majority if it had been a close vote, but I agreed with the opinions of the minority." Consistently, Mr. Clinton has come forward and said one thing about one affair and then said a different thing about another. With relation to the draft, he said, first of all, that he never got a draft notice. Then said he tried to defer and go into ROTC. And then it turns out that he actually did get a draft notice. He says that he says a couple of things. On the NAFTA pact, he, as governor of Arkansas, he's strongly in favor of free trade. When he came out into the campaign, the unions twisted his arm, and then he said he was reconsidering it. And so all along, the Clinton campaign has shown a pattern of deception, which really brings into question whether or not we can trust Bill Clinton to be the next president of the United States.
Greg, Jay, 1 minute rebuttal.
Steve, with all due respect, I cannot believe that you would, as a representative tonight of George Bush's campaign, bring up the accusation of waffling. First, George Bush was pro-choice. Then he was anti-choice. First, he was against unemployment compensation. Then he was for it. First, he said free trade. Free trade is the right thing. Then he goes in South Dakota and gives agricultural subsidies to the farmers there. First, he says we got to honor our treaty commitments to China. Then he goes to Texas and says, no, we're going to send 500 F-16s over to Taiwan. I mean, who is the real waffler? George Bush has tried to have it both ways consistently throughout his administration. On the important issue of the right of a woman to choose, he was once pro-choice. Now he's anti-choice because he had to sell out to the religious right. And let's let the American people be the judge of character. Let's let the American people decide who they trust to be president. Do they trust Bill Clinton, the governor of Arkansas, who for 12 years has brought hope to his people? Or do they trust George Bush, who in 1988 said,
Time.
No new taxes, read my lips?
Okay. Ben, next question goes to the Clinton side.
Okay. If we look at the last dozen years, it seems that the American people somehow feel secure with divided government. Maybe they think that it's necessary somehow to hold the government in check. They don't trust government. Assuming that the Congress remains democratically controlled, which by all accounts will happen, how can you reassure the American voters that a president who's democratic with a Congress that's democratic isn't a recipe for runaway pork?
The question of divided government is a very interesting one. What effects it truly has on America. Is it good? Is it bad? Does it simply keep the president in check or keep Congress in check? I think it partially does that, and at the same time it creates a lot of problems. It doesn't allow dynamic solutions to occur for things such as the deficit. The two sides are unable to agree on anything and achieve any great outcomes in policy. More importantly, assuming Governor Clinton is elected president 11 days from now, and we will again have a democratically controlled Congress, you fear that a runaway spending and runaway taxes. I don't think that's something you should have to worry about, because Bill Clinton has spent his political career in trying to change the way government works. Bill Clinton can go into Congress just as Richard Nixon went to China and said, look, the country is in this type of shape. We can't do these runaway spending programs. It's not feasible. We have to reinvent government. We have to change these spending, these taxing programs. You can't just do it. That's a failed answer. Just as tax and spend has failed, so is trickle-down economics. He's going to present this third way, and when he's elected, and I believe he'll be elected with a mandate, he can go to the Congress and assure them of these policies.
All right, 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, I'd like to first say right off that you compared Bill Clinton to Richard Nixon, and I'd like to say, well, not to be corny or anything, Greg, I know Richard Nixon. He's a friend of mine. Greg, Bill is no Richard Nixon.
Thank God for that.
Now on to the question at hand. If you want to look at what America's future would be like with a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress, first of all, look back to the last time that we had a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress. That time was 1976. The polls were saying things couldn't get any worse. Well, believe me, they got a lot worse. Much, much worse. In fact, inflation shot through the roof, up into the double digits, same with interest rates. And in fact, the misery index, something that the Democrats had created, was so high that they brought in Ronald Reagan by a landslide. Secondly, you want to look to the Arkansas record, where Bill Clinton was beholden not to a divided government, but to a Democratic legislature. And what has Bill Clinton done for Arkansas? It still ranks 49th and 50th by most indices.
It's time. Thanks. Okay, next question goes to Brian, and it's for the Bush side.
As the epidemic of AIDS continues to grow in the U.S. and around the world, many have criticized President Bush for a perceived lack of action on this important health issue. While it is true that federal spending on AIDS is higher than on some other diseases, all agree that no other disease has the potential to do as much damage as AIDS does. Recently, even Magic Johnson resigned from the President's Commission on the disease, saying Bush had not done enough. What concrete plans does President Bush have to address the spread and treatment of AIDS in the next 4 years?
AIDS funding has gone up 118% since 1989. It's 5 times the amount of money spent on cancer research, which is the second biggest killer in this country. I think what we've done with the AIDS problem is we've tried to treat it. And we got Magic Johnson and we told him, if there's anything you need, if you think there's something the administration should be doing that we're not doing, let us know, we'll do it. And he came to one meeting of the AIDS board that he was president of, and he had not suggested anything, and then he quit. We gave all opportunity to do something about the AIDS epidemic, and we've done it. We've done it through our civil rights legislation. We've done it through funding. What more can we do besides educating the public on TV, through the schools, colleges that get federal funding to distribute condoms and talk about things like that, and through the civil rights laws, and increase. I mean, what else can we do? We've done our best, and Magic Johnson is proof positive that they're just playing politics with this issue instead of getting down in the trenches and figuring out a solution to this problem.
Maybe I've been in the wrong country the last 4 years, but I don't know what education we've had about AIDS. Where the president has stood up and said this is a national problem. George Bush barely even says the word AIDS. He's scared of it for some unknown reason. We have to tackle this program head on. We have to fully fund the Ryan White Act. We have to allow expanded experimental treatment for those suffering from AIDS. But most important of all, we have to say this is a problem. We have to deal with it. We don't have to shun those who have it. We have to allow AIDS victims, we have to lift immigration restrictions on those with AIDS. And most important of all, I mean, they're talking about education, which I agree is critical, but they're against it. They're against condoms in the school. They changed it. They're scared of AIDS, and we can't be. We have to work to solve this great national problem.
Thanks a lot. Next question goes to Amy for the Clinton side.
Yes, Governor Clinton has been talking at length in recent weeks about how he has earned the people's trust. But given that a CBS New York Times poll earlier this week revealed that 56% of Americans have concerns about whether they could trust Bill Clinton, how do you think this will affect his ability to lead effectively, especially in the event of a national emergency?
I believe that Bill Clinton, when he is elected, will be able to lead effectively, and he'll be able to lead effectively because he will have earned the trust of the American people. You know, it's been over a year now since Bill Clinton announced his candidacy for the office of the President of the United States, and if you look back, it's amazing, the similarity of the things that he's saying now against the things that he was saying back in October. He says the same things everywhere in the country, all throughout his candidacy, no matter where he is. That's quite different from the President of the United States who goes around tossing pork all over the place when he sees that he's behind the polls. With all due respect to that CBS poll, we know that polls can be deceptive things. This is not a poll-driven campaign that Governor Clinton has been running. And I believe that same CBS poll showed that there were considerable doubts about the other candidates' trustworthiness as well. So I think that Bill Clinton, when he is elected, will have the trust of the people because he will have a mandate. He's been telling the American people exactly what he's going to do for the last 8 months. He's the only candidate to have put out a book of this length detailing exactly what he will do. The American people know what they're going to get with Bill Clinton. He will have the trust of the people because he's told them that this is what I want to get done. So I think that the question of trustworthiness, like I said, is one that's going to be decided by the American people on November 3rd, and I believe that they will send a resounding message that they trust Bill Clinton and Al Gore to be their president and vice president for the next 4 years.
Thanks, Jay. Bush side, 1 minute.
Yeah, let's talk about this book that tells us what we want and why we should trust Bill Clinton. This man has promised everything to every group. Paul Tsongas, Democrat, called him the pander bear. This man has promised everything to every group in the country. He can't possibly deliver to every promise he's made and promise that no one will hurt and no one will suffer and we'll have economic growth, unemployment will go down, inflation will stay low, interest rates will stay low. I mean, this man is unbelievable. Let's look at his draft record. Are you going to tell me that this is the man who the American people should trust? The man who it took him 9 months to come to the final truth of that? Let's talk about trust, and let's talk about the trust that George Bush evokes when he was leading that coalition for 500,000 of our troops to victory in Desert Storm. Let's talk about that trust instead of the trust of this book.
I'd like to come back and say that it's only through Slick Willie's shenanigans over the past 8 months that have salvaged his political career. If you want to see the pattern, if you want to see the trust and confidence that he's established with the voters, why don't you take Clinton's philandering extramarital past now on full display?
That's
There
time.
they go again.
That's time.
Literally.
Let's let him talk about that. Let's let him talk about that.
Maybe later in the question-answer session. Next, Ben, you're up with the Bush question.
All right. You just mentioned before that under a Clinton administration you think that interest rates would go through the roof and inflation would go through the roof. Right now they're both very low, yet the economy is still stagnating, and it's hardly because of interest rates that are too high or inflation that's too high. That a climate such as this has not fostered any growth suggests a larger crisis of confidence. How can George Bush reassure the American people, as he says, that America is not coming apart at the seams?
Yes. This part of Bush's plan is directly related to the Congress. This Congress has blocked everything. They've done nothing. They've spent everything. We've had an energy bill sit on Capitol Hill for 444 days. We've had a crime bill sit for 500 days. Healthcare reform, according to Jay Rockefeller, was stalled to, quote, screw the Republicans. Child care and parental choice reform for education have been on Capitol Hill for over a year. Enterprise zones, 300 enterprise zones to cure urban pockets of poverty have been sitting on Capitol Hill for a year. George Bush has proposed these reforms. And let's look at the economy. There's a liberal columnist in in the Brookings Institute who's saying that Bill Clinton has manufactured these lies about the economy. Like, look, of all objective measures in terms of unemployment, interest rates, inflation, export growth, I mean, as a 5% of the population, we produce 25% of its goods. We are the most productive nation in the world. 68% of our high school graduates go on to higher education. Our economy is not in a shambles. We're in a slowdown. What do we need to get it? We need incentive. We don't need spending. We need business. We don't need government.
Yeah, I'd just like to take the second 30 seconds. Mr. Perot has brought up a good point. Deficit reduction is a commitment that the Bush campaign is willing to make at this time. It's something that we're not sure that the Democrats are really eager to do. They know they can't get their spending programs passed if they really fully commit themselves to reducing the deficit significantly in the next 10 years. Now, the Democrats' plan, as outlined right now, would only try to attempt to cut the deficit over the next 5 years in half. I think the Bush plan exceeds that by far. If you want to take a look at the types of programs that would come about in the Clinton administration, take a look at the Arkansas record, where over the past 12 years, government spending has doubled, state debt has doubled, government management was ranked 41st worst in the nation, state bureaucracy has ballooned, and per capita income has fallen.
Thanks. Okay, for the 10th question, we go to Brian. Question for...
Excuse me, we have a rebuttal.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead.
I think the last exchange you heard is exemplary of the type of campaign that George Bush has been running this year. He is running in the past. Mr. Bush is running in the past. Governor Clinton and Senator Gore represent the future. George Bush is running against Michael Dukakis, Walter Mondale, Jimmy Carter, Lyndon Johnson, every single Democratic candidate for president except Bill Clinton. You know, the American people are tired about all these rumors about extramarital affairs and what Bill Clinton did 23 years ago. They're more interested in what's going to go on in 1993 and beyond. As far as Emil's response about, well, we haven't been able to do anything because the Congress blocks everything. You know, George Bush has been going across this country this year comparing himself to Harry Truman. Harry Truman had a sign on his desk. It said, "The buck stops here." George Bush seems to say, "Don't blame me. I'm only the president. I'm only the most powerful elected official in the world." As far as enterprise zones go, it's been passed. It was passed last week. But George Bush is going to veto that bill because it raises taxes on the rich. It has been passed. And as far as the health care reforms that Emil talks about, I mean, I'd like to know if Emil's seen them because nobody else has. Even Congress hasn't received the full package yet.
Thanks a lot. Okay, sorry about jumping the gun there. Next up, Brian, with the question for the Clinton side.
All right, Governor Clinton and Senator Gore have promised to take a stand on the environment in stark contrast to the record President Bush has built up over the past 4 years. But many observers have pointed out that progressive environmental policies, particularly of the nature Senator Gore has advocated in his book, not just page 304, but throughout his book, are extremely expensive, a real burden for both companies and ultimately for the American economy. What can Governor Clinton do that President Bush hasn't tried to do, and more importantly, how will he pay for it?
Well, first of all, I think we have to identify the lie of the Bush administration when George Bush declared, "I'm going to be the environmental president." What George Bush has proceeded to do in the last 4 years is gut every piece of environmental legislation he's had through Dan Quayle's little toy, the Competitiveness Council. I think this country has to recognize that environmental success and business success are not mutually exclusive. They can work together. Our competitors, the Germans and the Japanese, both recognize this. They see that the best way to develop jobs for the future, high technology jobs, is through environmental development. You develop products that are both efficient and clean. You get these things, these business innovations. So these things don't have to be so expensive. Again, this is this third way. It's not always right and left. There's a better way to do things. Governor Clinton has the support of both, wants to bring both business leaders and, timber cutters together in Oregon. And both sides support him there because he wants to find a better solution to the spotted owl situation. We can work together to preserve the environment and have business grow.
Do we have some time left, Christina? Yeah. Let me also refer to something that I had meant to refer to earlier in the debate, but I didn't have time. And it was Emil's reference that if the CAFE standards go up to 40 miles per gallon, that 300,000 auto workers will be tossed out of work. That is an outrageous lie. Emil, you know as well as I do that is assuming that every single auto worker in the United States who now puts his labor into the production of a car with a CAFE standard below 40% will just be tossed out of work instead of the auto companies adjusting to the new standards. That is an outrageous lie, and with all due respect, I think you know as well as I do that it will not toss 300,000 people out of work. I also urge everyone to look at the environmental speech that Governor Clinton made on Earth Day this year. He had never said that he is going to mandate a CAFE standard of 40 miles per gallon. He has simply stated that it is a goal of his, going to be a goal of his administration. He has never said that that's going to be mandated.
Yeah, he's waiting to see if he could rank Michigan up in his electoral votes before he says anything about CAFE standards. We know what he's really about. We know what Al Gore's about in his book, Saving the Spotted Owl Over Jobs, Saving the Spotted Owl Over Human Concerns. Let's talk about real issues. And 300,000 is a real number. That includes related industries to the auto industry. That includes steel and manufacturing that goes on in Ohio to produce the parts that go to GM, Ford, and Chrysler plants in Michigan.
Let's take a look at the Clean Air Act that was passed under the Bush administration, the most comprehensive piece of legislation addressing environmental issues in the past 20 years. What did the Clean Air Act do? It cut acid rain in half, reduced urban smog, and cut toxic air pollution by 90%. During the Bush administration, they collected penalties and fines more than any other administration before them. President Bush has proposed to spend $216 million in 1993 to enforce environmental protection laws, over 72% more than when he entered the White House. And let's take a look at the real record, the record of Mr. Gore and Mr. Clinton. Mr. Clinton's environmental record shows that Arkansas ranks 50th in lack of government action to protect the environment.
Time, Steve. Okay, thank you. Next question goes to Amy, and it's for the Bush side.
President Bush promised 4 years ago to be the education president, but his critics charge that he's done nothing for education, and his proposal for school choice was defeated in Congress. If he is elected on November 3rd, can the people realistically expect a program of serious educational reform?
Yeah. Okay, I'll take that question. President Bush said 4 years ago that he was committed to changing the educational system of this country, especially at the lower elementary levels and pre-high school levels. What has he done? In 1990, he convened a conference with the nation's governors and established a program called America 2000, which set out to set national standards for teachers, school systems, and students. They wanted to make America's students the best in the world in math and science by the year 2000. President Bush has expanded upon this, and he's actually done more than the Congress in proposing reforms. The fact of the matter is the Congress right now is beholden to a lot of special interest groups, namely the National Education Association, the NEA, which has basically a great majority of the Democrats in Congress in their back pocket. The NEA strongly opposes the entrance of new teachers into the job market there. They strongly oppose national standards. They strongly oppose the president's program to provide choice. But I think that given 4 more years, President Bush can do more. With a mandate from the people to change the educational system, he can go ahead with his GI Bill for children. What does this GI Bill do? It provides $1,000 vouchers for parents to defray the cost of sending kids to public, private, or religious schools. Now, this funding is provided to the parents and not to the schools themselves, and so the parents have the choice to send their kids where they want to go. This will give kids in the inner city a chance to break out of the urban ghettos and the barrios and to go to better schools outside of their area. What else does the GI Bill do? It provides competition for students, and it will introduce innovation and accountability into the system. The precedent for this GI Bill is a program instituted by a Democratic president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which was the GI Bill for World War II veterans. What this did was it provided funds for returning veterans to attend the college of their choice, public, private, or religious. And so basically President Bush's plan is modeled after that extensively. Under President Bush, Head Start was expanded tremendously. President Bush is committed to continuing in his efforts to salvage the educational system, and he seeks $500 million to support middle and lower income children.
Okay. Clinton side? Rebel?
Steve just said George Bush wants to do more in his next 4 years. Well, he certainly couldn't do any less in the matter of education. Educational reform has been a priority of Governor Clinton's since he's been governor of Arkansas. He realizes how important it is to giving children the opportunity to grow and to gain, and how important as well it is in our future economic strength. They mentioned Bush funding Head Start a little more. Well, in 1988, George Bush promised to fully fund Head Start. He didn't. Bill Clinton will. We also believe that there should be public school choice, but we shouldn't gut the public schools in order to give rich parents a little benefit in saving a little money to send their kids to private school. Something else, we want job training for those who don't go on to college. And then we have our domestic GI Bill, which Jay already discussed slightly, where every American would have the right to go to college, and in return for funding would either have the portion paid back over time with help from their income checks, or they would give 2 years of community service. This is a plan that George Bush just happened to develop in April this year when they discovered that Bill Clinton's plan was so popular. So maybe George did learn something.
Thank you. Okay, the final media question goes to Ben, and it's directed towards the Clinton side.
The founders of Lead or Leave spoke in this forum last month. Their goal was to get candidates for national office to sign a pledge, reduce the deficit by half by 1996, or don't seek re-election. Governor Clinton initially said he thought the pledge was a good idea, but he's refused to take it. How come?
I think it's irresponsible to take any pledge. We saw that in 1988 when Mr. Bush said, read my lips, no new taxes, and he had to go against it. It's not the 1990 budget agreement that we're against. It's Mr. Bush's initial cynical ploy to try to win that election by saying, read my lips. Governor Clinton's plan, as Greg mentioned earlier in the debate, proposed to reduce the deficit by more than half in his first administration. That's with moderate growth. If we have more growth than that, if we have high growth, if we're in a high growth economy, the budget deficit in 1997 will be $78 billion. We don't agree with the Perot plan, which says that we're going to increase the gasoline tax by 50 cents. We're going to raise taxes. We're going to cut spending drastically. We're going to balance the budget in 5 years. We are committed to a balanced budget. Governor Clinton has balanced 12 consecutive budgets, but we don't agree in sending the economy into a deep recession, another recession. I guess you could call it a quadruple dip recession by espousing the kind of measures that Ross Perot is doing. We're going to reduce the deficit gradually. We're going to do it with high growth economy. We're going to do it by increasing the job base, by increasing the tax base. So no, Governor Clinton has not and will not take a pledge that says 4 years from now, if we don't have a balanced budget, I'm not going to run, because he's not going to pull any ploy, make any read my lips promises to the American people, which no one knows the conditions are going to be like in 4 years. He's not going to take a read my lips pledge.
Let me just quickly add that this problem of the budget deficit didn't exist before Ronald Reagan came to office. Deficit in 1980 was under 60 or $70 billion. Today it's over $300 billion. We realize how important a problem it is, but as Jay pointed out, you don't want to kill it immediately. I mean, Ross Perot's plan kills the patient in order to cure it of one little disease. It has to be tackled, but you have to do it in moderation.
Thanks. Rebuttal?
Yes. Remember that the Congress has been controlled by the Democrats for the last 12 years. The first 4 budgets that Reagan-Bush submitted from 80 to 84 would have cut the deficit more than $200 billion, what it actually was. It was the Congress that didn't accept President Reagan's cuts because they had to bring home the pork to get reelected, and that's why they don't want term limits. That's why they don't want campaign finance reform. Let's talk. Let's talk about, of the 3 plans, which one is the most, treats the deficit the best. I mean, besides Perot's, Bush is second, and next is Clinton's. It's the Republicans who want the balanced budget amendment. The reason why Clinton balanced the budget in Arkansas is because he's required to by law. Why shouldn't the federal government be required to do what 43 states are required to do, which is balance the budget? Yeah, you're hissing at balancing the budget. That's what's wrong with tax and spend Democrats.
Why don't you respect the other audience's opinion?
Thanks a lot. Speaking of the audience opinion, now we're going to start taking questions from the audience, so if you can line up on the microphones. There are 2 microphones, incidentally. So. Okay, why don't we start over there?
Yeah, this question is directed towards the Democratic side. Governor Clinton poses as a moderate, but isn't it true that he's really controlled by tax and spend liberals such as Metzenbaugh and Rostenkowski, who support every piece of pork they can get their hand on? And isn't he controlled by protectionists such as Richard Gephardt, who's forced him to back off NAFTA? And isn't it true that he's controlled by unions such as NEA, who's forced him to flip-flop on school choice?
Before you respond to that, let me remind everybody it's 2 minutes to respond to the questions and then 1 minute rebuttal. Go ahead.
I think that if that is true, Bill Clinton is also a KGB dupe, as that side had been trying to pushed forward to the American people for a while. No, Bill Clinton is not controlled by these people. Why, in 1985, was Bill Clinton one of the founders of the Democratic Leadership Council? It's because he realized and saw the problems of tax and spend. He changed the party. Why would he do that and then hand it back to the people he wanted to change it from? I mean, let's be honest here. He's a different type of Democrat, committed to different things. In the primary campaign, he did not have strong union support. Outside the NEA, which did support him, I'll admit that, he was not supported by the unions. He was not the union's first choice. They went to Tom Harkin because they saw that Bill Clinton was a different type of Democrat who wouldn't do everything the unions wanted him to. It's not that he doesn't support unions. He does, but he doesn't support their entire agenda. You have to work and change. I'm sorry, Jay?
And I also would like to object to your statement that Governor Clinton is beholden to all of these special interests that you mentioned. A reporter from the I believe the newspaper is called the Arkansas Gazette. It's a major newspaper in Arkansas. Described Clinton's career as governor this way: "It has been a continuous fight against the two most powerful special interests in the state teachers union, whom he took on for 5 consecutive years in order to get him to agree to teacher testing. That was the most powerful union in the state. Second most powerful lobby in the state, and the most powerful lobby in the entire country, is the National Rifle Association. He took them on in 1981, continued to take them on until 1991, until he got effective gun control legislation passed in Arkansas. So no, he is not beholden to the special interests. He has not been in his career as governor of Arkansas, and he will not be as president of the United States."
Thank you. 1 minute rebuttal from the Bush side.
I can't believe that the guys over there have the gall to say that Clinton is not beholden to special interests, that he's not beholden to the wishes and desires of his party. Take a look at Arkansas's record. Over the past 12 years, they've had a Democratic legislature. If Clinton is so independent to do what he wants to do and what he's saying now, why didn't he do it back in the past? Why doesn't Arkansas have a civil rights law? Why doesn't Arkansas rank higher, according to the most indices? You're talking about fighting special interest groups. What about the Tyson chicken people, who employ well over 20% of the new jobs created since he became governor? Most of these people work for minimum wage jobs, and they work in the worst conditions in the country. Take a look at this article in Time magazine this week. I believe it's on page 54, about the horrid conditions of people working in Arkansas. These are the 300,000 jobs that he's created. Come on, America doesn't need that.
What's worse, 80% of education's the crowning achievement of Bill Clinton. Not one teacher has failed the teacher testing that he says has reformed education in Arkansas. 80% of all high school graduates who go on to college in Arkansas need remedial classes.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. Thanks. Okay, we'll take the second question over there.
Hi, my name is Randy Fine. I'm a freshman at the college, and I'm not going to make any doubts about this. Right now, I'm a Bush supporter. So my question is directed to the Clinton people. You say Bill Clinton, and I'm asking you this because I can't ever get anyone to give me a straight answer, and I want you to convince me to vote for him. Okay, and I mean this seriously. Bill Clinton, you said that he's been straight and forthcoming with the American people so far in this campaign, and I have no objection to what he did during the draft because I wasn't alive and I can't understand what it was like to live then. But I do understand what he said to us today. He said he didn't get a deferment. He did. He said he didn't get a draft notice, and then we find out he did. He said he didn't get any help in getting the notice. Then we find out he did. He said he didn't participate in demonstrations or organize demonstrations. Then we find out that he did. He said he went back to Oxford when he was going to join in the ROTC in Arkansas. And then we find out in some of these special orders that have been given on the House floor that Bill Clinton didn't even put in a full schedule at Oxford when he was away. Coming to things today, though, on NAFTA, Bill Clinton was for NAFTA, he's against NAFTA, now he's for it with restrictions. And on CAFE standards, regardless of what you guys said, I've read the book, and it's in the book, and Andrea Mitchell did a story on this, that Bill Clinton, in putting people first, says he wants to raise CAFE standards to 40 miles an hour. Now, with all of these things, with all these changes in what he has to say, can you truly tell me that you trust Bill Clinton, not in general, I'm not saying as a person, but can you trust Bill Clinton to implement all of these programs that he's proposing?
I don't think there's any question that Bill Clinton, and he said this, has regrets about the way he has handled the questions about the draft. Certainly it can't be an easy issue for him to talk about. It's not for any young American 23, 25 years ago who was dealing with the same problems that he did. A lot of the things that you brought up about what he said at one point and didn't at another, I don't think are borne out by the factual evidence. He never said that he had never participated in any demonstrations.
I
He
meant
always-
organized. He said he hadn't organized any.
He-
And then
the only,
we
the only
find
thing that
out
he
that
organized,
he did.
the only thing that he organized in England was a teach-in at Oxford. That was the only thing that he organized. He was a participant.
That's what he
in a
said.
couple of marches.
Others would differ.
So you're saying that, you know, he says, you know, how can you believe, you know, whether he
They're
organized
not running for
demonstrations or
president.
not?
That's all. I mean,
Could
it's just,
you
yeah,
let
yeah,
me
I understand.
finish the question?
I mean, Governor Clinton, you know, like I said, the draft cannot be an easy thing for him to talk about. And I'm sure he has regrets about the way he's handled the situation. He was opposed to the war, unlike some, like the Vice President of the United States. And so, like many other young men at the time, you know, he had a conflict, you know, in his heart over serving his country and then going to a war that he knew was morally wrong. Sure, he would have handled some of the questions differently, but I don't think that that should be the sole judge of whether you trust the man or not. One thing that happened, you know, when he was 22 years old, I don't think that ought to be the sole thing. As far as your objections to his, you know, waffling on NAFTA, you know, that's the entire problem with the old way of doing things. It's got to be black and white. You either got to be for it or you got to be against it. Governor Clinton says, no, there's a third way. I'm for free trade. I'm in principle for free trade. I support the NAFTA agreement with Mexico and Canada as long as environmental standards are upheld, as long as we have a national economic strategy to retrain those workers who are going to be tossed out of work inevitably as a result of this. There's a third way to do it. It's not black and white. It's not one or the other. It's not I support it or I don't support it. I support it, but we can do it better. That's what he's saying about NAFTA.
Obviously, these guys are having trouble defending Bill Clinton because he is indefensible on this point. He has proved throughout his career, throughout his marriage, throughout everything, that he is not allowed. And yes, you hiss, but it was the Democrats who brought up George Bush's supposed infidelity. It was the Democrats who said George Bush was sick. It was the Democrats who said Marilyn Quayle was sick. It was the Democrats who raised all these rumors about Republicans. Let's play fair now. Both sides use sleazy tactics. Let's not tack the Republicans on to this thing. These are sleaze questions, but we've been forced to answer them because the American public's interested in them. Don't pretend to be above the fray because you're not above the fray. If you're going to be president, they have to look to you and trust you. And people, you know, he's proven throughout this whole draft controversy that he cannot be trusted. He cannot be trusted to stand on his principles. Yes, he waffles. He doesn't have a principled leg to stand on with NAFTA, with education, with anything.
I believe it was Senator Bob Kerrey who first told Bill Clinton to come forward and tell the truth.
Okay, thanks. Before the next question, if I could just reiterate that they are actually questions, not statements, not speeches. If we keep that in mind, please go ahead.
Just a short question.
Thank you.
To the Clinton side. How much specifically will the increased tax on upper-income Americans raise? And secondly, how much specifically will the tax on foreign corporations in America raise?
Well, the total over 4 years, it's a 4-year total of $150 billion. It's split about $20 billion per year on the increase from 31 to 36% on those earning over $200,000, and the rest is about, I think, 17%. If you want me to look it up, I will do that for you. Here we go. We got. Where is this? Here it is. It's about $20 billion a year, as I said, on this increase in taxes, and the rest is around $15 billion a year, give or take, on these closing of loopholes, particularly in foreign corporations.
Those statistics have been refuted by just about every economist in the country. Those 7 Nobel laureates that he claims have supported they supported it in principle. When they added up the numbers, they didn't work. They supported Keynesian economics to avert a recession. They didn't support his number. No one agrees with that number. That's absolutely ridiculous. When you like relegate where that money's going to come from, that can go all the way down to $36 billion a year. And just remember, those Democrats in Congress and committee chairmen have been waiting for 12 years. They are thirsty for big government. They are thirsty for spending. And when Bill Clinton gets in there, he's going to be beholden. He's going to have to honor those commitments, and he's going to spend us out of this world.
I'd urge you all to take a look at the article in this magazine here that says that by the year 1994-95, President Clinton, completely hypothetical President Clinton, would be
Finally said something true.
For President Clinton would his funds would peter out around 1994-95. He'd have to extend taxes. Moreover, the Bush estimates show that he would have to lower the lower the rates down from 200,000 to a much lower level.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. We're going to go over there.
Today, all over America, people are losing their homes because they're not covered by health insurance. Can you explain how President Clinton and his administration will deal with this crisis, which the Bush administration has not addressed?
Well, I think in dealing with the health care situation, you have to address two key things. First of all, we have the spiraling cost of health care. Health care increased at 3 times the national rate of inflation, meaning it increased about 12% a year. This is one of the major causes of our deficit, considering it means Medicare payments are exorbitant, and it's a great problem. The other part is we have 35 million Americans who don't have health insurance, and another 25 million Americans whose health insurance isn't adequate. They're worried they're going to lose it. It doesn't cover everything. So you have to handle both these problems. How do you do it? First of all, you have to control health care costs. Clinton proposes creating this new board, which would include representatives of government, labor, pharmaceutical companies, and the medical community to set targeted standards and basic benefit packages for all Americans. Targeted rising costs. Then you have to deal with the drug companies. Those drug companies that gouge prices, you hit it with a higher tax. Okay? Got to handle drug prices. Then, to cover all Americans, propose a system dealing with both HMOs, which would encourage Americans to get together in groups. With larger groups, you minimize risk. You pay a fixed amount, which encourages the HMO to keep the costs down, keep prices down. Also, there's a pay-or-play system in which businesses will be required to provide health care for their employees, and then if they didn't do so, they would pay a small fee, which would then the government would pool this money together and purchase health care for the people. And I think you're absolutely right that George Bush has done nothing on this issue, not even submitting a full plan to the Congress on what to do. It's a great problem. If we can solve it, or at least reduce the problems, we'll have gone a long way into not only making the American people feel safer about their health, we'll also have stepped into solving the deficit in a big way.
Let me also add very briefly that a bipartisan commission that studied health care, more Republicans and Democrats on the commission, said that Bill Clinton's plan would cover everybody by the year 2000. George Bush's would not. Bill Clinton's plan would save money by the year 2000, while George Bush's plan would cost money.
Thanks, Jay. 1 minute rebuttal.
Yeah, I beg to differ on the composition of that commission. From what we've heard, there was only one Republican member on the commission. It was primarily dominated by Democrats, and of course they'd endorse Bill Clinton's proposal. I mean, he's our candidate. Come on. Okay, let's take a look at President Bush's plan over the next 4 years. He would guarantee access to health insurance by providing health care tax credits and health care tax deductions of up to $37.50. He would provide insurance security for all Americans by providing it directly to the individuals and not through employers, so they wouldn't have to fear losing their health care packages if they move from job to job. Within 5 years, our estimates show that 30 million uninsured Americans could be insured and they could gain coverage, and over 90 million Americans will benefit. How are we going to reduce the cost of health insurance? Well, we're going to encourage people to involve themselves in health insurance networks by pooling their efforts with small businesses so that they can use the power of big numbers to purchase reasonable health care plans. Another thing that the Bush proposal would like to do is curb malpractice suits. Incredibly, malpractice suits and defensive medicine account for $20 billion each year. This is not a move that the Clinton campaign is not willing to take.
You're going to have to cut you off there. Okay, next question. We'll go over to Trey.
Rhetoric and partisan differences aside, Emil, how can you argue that George Bush will be a more effective president in the second term? Since, I mean, I know we talked about this, that he obviously was ineffective domestically during his first term. And aren't you really more afraid of a Bill Clinton presidency than you are hopeful that a George Bush second term would be an improvement?
That's a good question, Trey. No time in the 20th century is there going to be such a greater turnover of Congress as this year. We're going to expect 120 to 130 new members, and freshman congressmen together get in there and support their own agenda. They don't necessarily follow the partisanship blindly. When they get in there, they're going to have a mandate from the people for change. The question is, what change do they want? And George Bush is the right timing right now. We're having change. I mean, we're having a new group come in. These entrenched people are leaving because of the post office scandal, because of the House banking scandal, because of the scandals that have plagued this Congress for so long, the bounce checks, everything that has made this Congress a do-nothing, block everything, hide everything, partisan politic Congress. It's time for that to end. And with that in there, Bush can move his agenda through, and he's going to be a different president in his second term.
Bill Clinton is also very excited that there are going to be 130 to 150 new members of Congress. Because what's going to happen in January of 1993 is you're going to have a President Clinton who was elected on a mandate because he told the people exactly what he was going to do, and he's not beholden to the old ways of tax and spend and trickle-down economics, and he's going to have 130 to 150 new congressmen who I think generally feel just the way he does, Republicans, Democrats, Independents alike. So I think the prospect of a Clinton administration for the next 4 years is very exciting because we've got all of these people in there in the halls of power now who are not entrenched to the old ways of thinking, who are going to have a new way of doing things, and I really think that it's going to be a period of unprecedented growth for the United States of America.
It's getting pretty late, so I think we have time for 2 more questions. Chris, go ahead.
The New York Times just reported that under Republican administrations for the last several years, the personal income tax burden for the lowest 20% of the people, the poorest 20%, was reduced 540%. Yet for the richest 20%, it was only reduced 9.9%. Now, taking into consideration that by most indices, Arkansas ranks 44th in tax fairness, do you think he will be able to match the success in tax fairness the Republicans have been able to achieve?
And the question of tax fairness, I don't know where I have not seen those numbers. I think the more accurate numbers show that the top 20%, not only have they gotten richer, they're paying less in taxes. The middle 60% of this country has pretty much stayed the same while their taxes have gone up, and the poorest 20% have gotten much worse off. And you want to talk about tax fairness in Arkansas. While Arkansas does not have the most progressive tax system, there's a very good reason for that. To pass any income tax increase within Arkansas, you need 3/4 of the state legislature to approve that. So that's a virtually impossible number to get. Therefore, Governor Clinton, a few times in his administration, has had to go to the people and say, look, I want to do this. I want to make our schools better. Will you give me a 1% increase in the sales tax? Every time the people of Arkansas have voted on this and approved it, he didn't just ram it through. He didn't just say, well, I'm going to raise your taxes so I can do this program. He said, I'm going to raise your taxes 1 cent on every dollar you spend, and you're going to get better at schools, as they did. And to try and claim the Republicans are a party of tax fairness is a bit absurd. I mean, they have just lowered and lowered the tax rate on the wealthy while hitting up the rest of the American people, not only with the income tax rate, but hitting them with the Social Security tax, which ends at $55,000, meaning you don't pay it on amounts higher than that. It's an extremely regressive tax, and we need more tax fairness. The rich are just getting a free ride for the past 12 years.
I mean, how else do you explain the fact that President Bush will veto the new bill that was sent through Congress, the new spending bill last week, that includes enterprise zones, which President Bush and Governor Clinton are both for, which includes investment tax credits, research and development tax credits? How can you explain his veto of that bill other than the fact that he does not want to raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans?
I'll explain that in a few words. He has principles to stand on. He's standing behind his commitment to not raise taxes unfairly. And I think that's something Governor Clinton has not failed to do. And yes, you're right. Governor Clinton did go to Arkansas and say, can I raise your taxes 139 times. And that's a Democratic number.
Hey.
That came out of the Clinton campaign. You guys can shut your ears as much as you want by hissing, okay? But that doesn't change the fact that that came out of the his Democratic campaign after they researched what Bush did. They just found different tax increases. There's still 139 of them. Let's talk about tax fairness. Over the 1980s, tax revenues increased from $1 trillion in 1980 to $1.5 trillion in 1990. The rich did pay their share of taxes. They paid more taxes. The problem is spending. The spending didn't decrease, it increased. For every $1 in revenue, they increased spending by $2. If that's the kind of government you want, then Bill Clinton's your man. If you want someone who supports the balanced budget amendment, if you want someone who supports fair taxes for everybody. I mean, when you get to a tax rate where you're paying more than half your income between Social Security taxes, income taxes, sales taxes, disability taxes, you're not working for yourself, you're working for the government.
Okay, and the last question.
It's fairly obvious to anyone who's been following the campaign that the environment is playing a key role in this year's election, and in that light, this question is addressed towards the Bush supporters. My basic question is that earlier in the debate, you mentioned the fact that Bush has done a lot for the environment in the sense that he passed the Clean Air Act of 1990. Now, if you consider that a successful piece of legislation, how can you reconcile the fact that the Dan Quayle's Committee on Competitiveness has managed to destroy that piece of legislation so now that it's basically not worth the paper that it's printed on?
That's a good question, and the Council on Competitiveness has concerned itself deeply with the recession we've been in for the past year. And
2 years.
And in the past year, what we've done is firms have applied to the Council on Competitiveness for a relaxation, a temporary relaxation of standards so they can stay open and keep jobs and keep people off the unemployment lines. Now, Dan Quayle made these exceptions hoping that people will appreciate that they still have their jobs instead of no jobs. There are some sacrifices that have to be made in terms of that. And the Council on Competitiveness, which the liberals wanted to defund, speeded the drug approval process for AIDS victims, for cystic fibrosis patients. He saved the lives of over 300 people by speeding, the process of approval of drugs. That's what the Council on Competitiveness does. It saves jobs, it saves lives.
Now, looking at President Bush's record as president for the environment, during his 4 years, he added more than 1.5 million acres to America's national parks, forests, wildlife refuges, and other public lands. He proposes to plant 1 billion trees a year for the next several years and to end clear-cutting as a standard practice in our national forests. He's also accelerated the United States phase-out of ozone-harming substances, and he has shown through his actions and through his words, a strong commitment to environmental protection. On the other hand, let's take a look at Bill Clinton's record. In the environment, his state ranks 48th overall in environmental quality. His state ranks 42nd in the percent of clean rivers and streams, and his environment ranks 10th highest in per capita ozone-depleting emissions. Let's take a look at Senator Gore's book. It's riddled with inaccuracies. One of his claims is that a vast majority of scientists agree that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is causing a dangerous global warming. Actually, 47% of the scientists surveyed strongly disagreed. He also said that the polar ice cap has thinned by 2% in the past decade. There's no specific evidence of such an action. He also said that man's impact on the environment is causing drastic and potentially catastrophic temperature changes that did not occur before modern times. There's no record of that either. And that plants and animals are vanishing 1,000 times faster than the past 65 million years.
I'm going to have to cut you off there. Okay, now we're going to... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Now we're going to hear the rebuttal.
George Bush did say in 1988 that he would be the environmental president. The only specific that he offered at that time was that he said we were going to have a no net loss policy for wetlands. What he then proceeded to do in 1990 was to change the definition of wetlands so that 50% of what was wetlands was no longer defined as wetlands. So he did gut the wetlands. His own appointee, William Riley, the EPA administrator, called the American intransigence at the Rio summit embarrassing. That was Bush's own appointee, William Riley. Finally, I'd like to close on this point that Emil brought up about 139 taxes, 128, 139, call it whatever number you want. Let me tell you some of the tax increases that they enumerated. The first was an increase in the length of the dog racing season. The logic? Well, since there's going to be more races, there's going to be more fees. Another one, a $1 birth certificate fee. Another one, a $1 fee, well, a $1 cost for the incarceration of prisoners. In fact, the Wall Street Journal, hardly a liberal publication, looked at the record and said that Bill Clinton had in fact lowered taxes 126 more times than he had increased them, whereas George Bush in 4 years has increased taxes at 4 times the rate that Bill Clinton did in Arkansas in 12 years.
Okay. Now we're going to go for the closing arguments. Each side gets 2 minutes. Clinton's side is going to start.
First of all, I'd like to thank my opponents for coming here and telling me things about Bill Clinton I never knew before. I'd like to thank Jeremy for putting this all together, and of course our panelist, Brian. I want to know how my tie rates in tomorrow's scorecard in the Crimson. And I also, most of all, want to thank all of you. I hope you've gained something from this. I hope you've listened, and most of all, I hope you'll vote. This election comes at a critical juncture in our nation's history. We must decide if we're going to follow the path of debt and division, or we're going to follow a new path of investment and inclusion. Will America continue to slip, or will we conclude that this is not acceptable? George Bush and Dan Quayle have run a campaign that is based on fear. fear of the new, fear of the different. Bill Clinton and Al Gore instead offer hope. Hope for better growth and opportunity. Hope for better education. Hope that women have the right to choose. Hope for an end to discrimination. Hope for a continued movement towards democracy throughout the world. While all these objectives may not be met under a Clinton-Gore administration, the two principles will never give up on trying to solve them. And with the help of the American people, we can strive to make them reality. In 1980, Ronald Reagan asked the American people, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" George Bush repeated that question in 1988, and sadly today the answer must be no. But there's a more important reason not to vote for Bush and Quayle. It's the question, will you be better off 4 years from today than you are now? If you elect Bill Clinton and Al Gore, the answer to that question will be yes. We do not dislike Bush and Quayle. They've dedicated their lives to public service and obviously love their country. But sadly, they're unwilling to abandon the status quo and fail to recognize a new direction that our nation needs. Bill Clinton and Al Gore represent a change from these failed policies of Republicans and Democrats alike. They offer a third way to bring our nation into the 21st century. As students, this election is about us, what our America is going to look like, what our lives will be like 20 years from now, what our children's lives are going to be like. For that reason, more than any other, I ask you to vote for Bill Clinton and Al Gore.
Thanks a lot, Greg.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll close the debate now with the Republican 2-minute closing summary.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for putting this together. I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight, those who came with open ears, open minds, and didn't hiss. The question being asked tonight is, who is best fit to govern the United States? I want you to ask yourself first, what the role of government should be. Is it control and direction over its citizens' lives? Or is it the insurance of liberty and equality of opportunity? Is it to empower employees by dragging down employers? Or is it to enlarge and protect the entrepreneurial spirit that has built our country up over the past 215 years? Is it mandates and policy of one-size-fits-all that will lead us up? Or is it individuality, volunteerism, and perseverance that will lead us to be that shining city on the hill that Reagan spoke of 12 years ago? I say that a government which promises to act in the so-called interests of the people, scares them into submission, and then purports to know what's best for them, instead of them knowing what's best for themselves, is bound to make our darkest days darker and our formerly bright days wanting for light. You have an opportunity on November 3rd to decide which candidate best represents your view of government. Put away the media blitzes and the campaign rhetoric. Don't believe that we're, quote, the mockery of the world, as Bill Clinton will have you believe. Instead, decide who can give you the country you need. We all need change, but not the change toward government control. We are the real revolutionaries. We are the real agents of change. We want to privatize public housing, give poor families a stake in their community. Republicans want to give their families the right to choose the education for their children. We believe in civil rights for the disabled, those infected with HIV and AIDS, and minorities. We want to revitalize inner cities with enterprise zones. The Republican Party wants to further democracy in the world. George Bush has given us sleep with less fear of nuclear destruction. President Bush has protected the middle class by keeping inflation and interest rates low. George Bush may be a president plagued by, a slick opponent who says, our wages have dropped from 1st to 13th, without telling you that the figure is based on exchange rates rather than real purchasing power. The president might be plagued with, a global recession and unrelentlessly negative press. But you must go in the ballot booth and decide for yourselves what's the right choice for America. Take your ideas of government and contrast them with the candidates. Do you favor health care of 7% on small businesses? I just finished 10 more seconds, please. George Bush has the character, the drive, the ideas, the desire to take on a new Congress and send the country on a new path. Ronald Reagan said last week, our origins matter less than our destinations in America. The other side might paint a picture of doomed misery, failure, but Americans will not stand for the arrogance of a government that thinks it knows best. The American people will not stand to be called the mockery of the world. We must stand behind George Bush. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank you all for coming here tonight. I'd also like to thank our debaters, the media panel, and Christina, the timekeeper. If anybody is interested in working on student debates like these, I urge you to come to Harvard Political Union meetings at the IOP Wednesdays at 6:30. And if you're interested in presidential politics, next Wednesday we're going to have Bob Beckel and Ed Rollins, Republican and Democrat political analysts, come speak at the forum Wednesday at 5:30. And finally, I'd like to encourage all of you, no matter who you agreed with tonight, to, on November 3rd, go out and vote. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Sure. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, John.
Good job. Thanks.
Good question.
That's Dave.
It was a pretty high quality debate. I'm impressed.